Humanity is going up in a war against aliens called buggers. They train child soldiers in three-dimensional combat to learn to pilot ships against the buggers. Why do they train children? Because children will have less to unlearn in order to be able to fight well in 3 dimensions. Depending on how you feel about that explanation, you can take it or leave it. Ender's older brother and sister were close to being the perfect commander each, but Peter, Ender's older brother, was too psychotic, and Valentine was too kind. Ender is approximately the mix in the middle of them. A kid bullies Ender at school. Ender beats the crap out of him, saying that he has to not just end this fight, but every fight. Unknowingly, he kills this kid. Commander Graf comes to Ender's house and says that Ender is ready for battle school, taking him away from his psychopath brother and hyper-empathetic sister for an unknown amount of time. At battle school, Ender is bullied by his commander Bonzo for being small. Ender uses his free time to train, and Bonzo gets mad when Ender forcefully helps him win some battles. Ender also plays a computer game a lot. Ender is promoted to being the head of his own army, which win consistently because Ender is so smart and he keeps coming up with amazing strategies. The command continues to impose challenges on Ender's army, like making him fight multiple times at once, making them fight back to back, and Ender continues to win every single one. Bonzo is salty and attacks Ender. Ender murders his ass, unknowingly. Ender is tired and is given some time away from battle school, and he goes to the lake where he meets Valentine, who, at the request of the commanders, convinces Ender to continue his training. Ender agrees and goes to the moon to continue training. He finds out that his old war hero Mesa is still alive, and Mesa becomes Ender's mentor. Mesa tells Ender about the weird bugger ships and how they might communicate differently from us. Ender is incredibly depressed and sleep deprived for months while facing horrific training schedules, fighting simulated bugger ships on the computer with his friends from battle school, one of his friends being called Bean. Mesa takes Ender to his final exam, where he has to fight 1,000,000 simulated ships on the screen. Mesa also tells him that using nuclear weapons is basically a war crime and that you shouldn't really do it, but he also tells him about how humanity has invented this little doctor, which is an amazing, incredible nuclear weapon bomb. Angry, sleep-deprived, and resenting the entire situation, Ender says fuck it to the whole game and uses the bomb to blow up the bugger planet, absolutely decimating it. All the army officials who came to watch the exam start weeping, and the kicker of the novel is finally revealed. They inform Ender that all of his games of the last few months have been entirely real. He and his team have been commanding real ships, and he just used a real nuclear weapon to commit real genocide, or xenocide, on the entire bugger species. Ender instantly becomes catatonic in depression. Simultaneously with the entirety of the above plot, back on Earth, the dubiously evil Peter wants to do something great with his life, even if it's stopping the global war that's about to start. He invents fake online political personalities for himself and his sister called Locke and Demosthenes, which gained strong political standing and following. They successfully fend off global war, and soon after Peter becomes the hegemon, the word that they use for the leader of humanity. After the xenocide takes place and the war is fended off, Valentine goes to the moon and her and Ender begin to explore old bugger colonies. On one of the colonies, Ender finds real-life terrain that exactly matches part of the terrain in that computer game he was playing. He goes to his favorite spot inside of that game and finds a hidden bugger cocoon, which telepathically communicates with him. Ender learns that Mesa was completely correct about his theory on the buggers, and that they were largely unconscious, with worker drones being controlled by individual hive queens. Thus, the species had no qualms about killing, expecting that when they were killing human drones, the real human beings would show up and they'd be able to communicate telepathically. They were basically trying to say hi. When they realized humans were sentient, they were absolutely devastated and retreated back to their homeworld with no intention of ever attacking again. Ender is very, very sad to learn that he committed genocide to an entirely gentle species. He swears to find a new suitable world for the last hive queen to grow and repopulate. Meanwhile, he writes The Hive Queen and The Hegemon about the bugger species and his brother respectively, which both go viral and start a new religion. Speaker for the Dead. In the time between Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead, Ender and Valentine have spent 3,000 years real time and about 20 years subjectively traveling at light speed between human colony worlds, looking for a new home for the Hive Queen. Ender's name practically becomes a slur as the Hive Queen book goes viral, and it becomes clear to the whole world that the xenocide of the buggers was completely immoral. Meanwhile, the name of the original speaker for the dead, the author of The Hive Queen and the Hegemon, is exhaled as the pinnacle of goodness. Only Ender's sister Valentine knows that Ender is both still alive and that he is both the speaker and the Xenocide. Valentine continues to write as Demosthenes and publishes a seminal novel on the hierarchy of species, labeling species that are intelligent and can be communicated with as Virals, and intelligent but incommunicable species as Ramen. Eventually, Ender and Valentine settle, with Ender becoming a boring university professor, and Valentine marrying a fisher and having 2 kids. Eventually, humans discover and set up a small research colony on Lusitania, the home planet of the first intelligent alien race discovered since the Buggers, called the Pequeninos. But since that's too respectful of a term for an alien species in this universe, they're actually referred to as piggies. The research style of the researchers, called Xenodors, is incredibly hands-off, as they don't want to call any attention to themselves or to human culture. Navinia is an intern Xenodor whose parents created the cure to the Descalada, a disease native to Lusitania, but unfortunately they died before they could use the cure on themselves. Navinia makes a discovery about Pequenino biology and shares it with Pipo, who pieces together more of the mystery than Navinia is able to. Pipo is something of a father figure to Navinia. He shares this information with the Pequeninos and is found dead and splayed open the next morning. Navinia calls out for a speaker of the dead to speak at Pipo's funeral. Navinia longs to marry Libo, Pipo's son, who's also a Xenodor, but knows that marrying him would give him access to all of her files, and fears that if Libo was able to go through Navinia's files, he would experience the same fate as Pipo. So instead she marries Marcos, who abuses her and her new family of 4 children. Meanwhile, Navinia and Libo have started being a lot closer to the piggies than their orders explicitly allow, the orders coming from the Star Wars Congress, which is something of an interplanetary government. Libo is also murdered by the Pequeninos a few decades later, for unknown reasons. Ender is on his way, and Navinia's husband dies shortly before Ender arrives. Ender, the nearest speaker for the dead, arrives 22 years of starflight later. It's been a few weeks or so for him. With him he now has Jane, his super Siri sexy alien robot who can do anything and hack into any computer, but she basically can only speak to him through an AirPod that he wears. The only thing she can't do is control her horniness for Ender. In preparing for the speaking, he spends his time colliding with the church, meeting the Pequeninos and being a super therapist to Navinia and her children. Ender learns that Marcos was actually barren, and Navinia secretly bore all her children with Libo. While Ender learns and helps that family, the scientists on the planet learn that the Descalada is actually entirely foreign to Lusitania, and what it actually does is cause species to meld together with each other. They'd previously discussed with the piggies and learnt about their silly religion of believing that they could speak to trees, but suddenly they realized that the piggies' religion was actually entirely true, and that the trees very much were dead piggies, and that the piggies were actually trying to honor how much they cared for Pipo and Libo, by splaying them open and hoping that they too would be able to reach the third life of being able to turn into trees. Ender says, "Sounds good," and the piggies say, "Okay," and Ender writes a treaty for humans and piggies living together, stating that they can be cool, but that they can't cut each other up because humans don't go into the third line. The piggies say, yep, sounds good, but Ender has to do a blood pact with us for it to be legit. So they make Ender splay open the piggy who's decided to call himself Human, to honor him so that he can turn into a telepathic tree. Ender hasn't done much writing since he wrote those 2 Bible sequels, but his writer's block finally clears up and he writes The Life of Human, completing his trilogy of 1 book for every alien species, between the Hive Queen, the Hegemon, and now The Life of Human. Through all this, he continues to chat to Jane in his earpods non-stop. Feeling lonely, Ender calls Valentine, who gets on a ship from the nearest planet, ready to arrive and be a part of the next book. As well as her husband, who you'll never hear from again, is also a young female scientist who's very horny and has a massive crush on Ender and swears to follow all his work and be his sire and to never forget or ignore him. Do not forget about her, she's a super relevant character. While talking to Navinia, Jane is nagging about something in Ender's ear, and Ender takes off his AirPods for an hour. Big mistake. Jane experiences 1,000 years of solitude and realizes how salty she is over Ender flirting with Navinia. she decides to snitch to the Starways Congress that the people on Lusitania are breaking the Xenodor's code and talking to the piggies, justifying herself by saying that by having a common enemy, it would make it easier for Ender and the church to get along so that they can fight the common enemy. Starways Congress places Navinia and Lebo under arrest and sends a ship that will arrive in about 20 years to come and take them to court. But even if they are found innocent, the voyage to Starways Congress and back would mean that by the time they returned, everybody they knew would be dead. So it's a metaphorical death sentence either way. Miro, who's one of Navinia's kids, wants to rebel from his family or meet the piggies himself. I don't actually really remember what he was trying to do. He's not really relevant in this book. But he tries to climb over this super cool electronic fence that they have separating the humans from the piggies. Big mistake. He's permanently crippled and becomes incredibly depressed. So Jane hooks up onto his AirPods and starts to talk to him as well. But even though that the ship to Starways Congress was metaphorically a death sentence for those people because of time dilation from traveling at the speed of light, it actually is an actual death sentence because on it, Starways Congress have put the Little Doctor, which is the nuclear bomb that Ender used to blow up the bugger homeworld. Starways Congress does this because they consider the piggies and the Descalada to be potential threats to all of human life, so they're coming to wipe Lusitania out. But the actual biggest plot twist here is that Ender suddenly marries Navinia, replacing the children as their father. With the bomb from Starways Congress coming to wipe them all out, Ender realizes that all of the planets he's been to, he's finally in a place that's safe enough for the buggers to be born. So he lets the bugger's egg hatch, and the buggers start to build a new society on Lusitania. And so you have the first planet that has 3 or 4 alien species: humanity, buggers, piggies, Descalada. Xenocide. On a Chinese planet called Path, a rich dad tells her rich daughter, Qingjiao, that she's very, very smart and very gifted by the gods. In their society, they call these people Godspoken. Qingjiao's dad tells her to always be loyal to the gods. The Godspoken often do really bizarre rituals in communicating with the gods, like tracing lines of wood around the house or going through doorways in strange ways. Sound familiar? A smart servant girl growing up in the streets of Path called Wangmu rocks up and asks Qingjiao very, very cleverly if she's cool with her being her slave. Qingjiao agrees and says, "Yep, you can be my slave," and then they become friends. Qingjiao's dad tells Qingjiao that the people in Lusitania are very, very bad and deserve to be detonated by Starways Congress. On Lusitania, Valentine arrives. It's now been a very long time. It's been like 20 years because of the way that Starflight happened. So Ender and his children, which are like Navinia's children, which include Miro being the guy who was electrocuted by the fence, and as well as some of the other children who become a bit more relevant now that they're a bit older. They're all like 20 or so. And Ender is like 40 or 60 now. The Hive Queen has now started a whole industrial society with her bugger workers, slaves / selves. She's unreliable as she sees the past and the present as both the same thing, so she's really happy changing her commitments and sees nothing wrong with it. It doesn't really become really relevant to the story, but it's one of the bits that I really like about this book because it puts her as like a really alien personality, kind of, depending on what type of people you're around. Ender sets up a super team of Navinia's super smart children to help solve the problem of the Descalada and the other problems that are going on. Jane just never tells Ender that she's the snitch that put the 2 alien species at risk. So Jane and Ender are completely cool, they make up and they're good. But now Jane is also talking to Miro, which makes Ender a bit jealous, but you know. Jane is connected to every instance of Microsoft Edge in the entire galaxy, and so she shuts down communications from the ship that Starways Congress has sent to detonate Lusitania, this ship being called the Lusitania Fleet. Qingjiao's dad, who does work for Starways Congress, asks Qingjiao to find out how the Lusitania people did it. Qingjiao takes the impossible task in stride, and over many, many months deduces the existence of a being exactly like Jane, residing in the network of the Ansibles, which is basically the internet. She snitches this information to her father, who orders a strike on Jane to kill her, which they'll do by disabling the whole internet. Ender reasons that faster than light travel must exist because of the way that the internet in this universe works, where information can be put across the galaxy at instant speed. And also that's also the way that the Hive Queens communicate with their workers. They can communicate stuff instantly. He figures that figuring out faster than light travel would be the solution to the threat of the Little Doctor, as they could escape and take piggies and buggers all across the universe well before the Lusitania fleet arrives. However, now that the true threat of the Descalado virus has been realized, they first need to find a way to neutralize the Descalado virus because it's a bad, bad virus. You may be thinking, didn't Navinia's parents neutralize that virus? I'm also thinking that. I forgot why it was a problem again. But it was a big problem, okay? It was a very serious problem. Don't deny it, okay? Viruses are not something to joke about. But they can't just simply kill the entire Descalado virus because it's completely melded with the genetic makeup of the piggies. So killing the Descalado virus would also kill the piggies. Ender's surrogate child, Cora, designs the Recalada, a version of the virus which does not harm the piggies but also doesn't harm humans. However, she's unable to manufacture it because it's too hard. Jane does some research about the Godspoken people of Path and learns that their intelligence was actually artificially made by Starways Congress because they needed really smart humans to help solve random problems, but they needed a way to stop these humans from getting out of control. So remember all that line tracing and stuff that King Zhao does? That's actually OCD that they added artificially into those people to keep them under control. Jane manages to communicate this information with King Zhao's dad, Wang Mu, who's King Zhao's slave, and asks all of them very nicely to please not kill her, also telling them that their oh-so-precious government actually ruined their lives. King Zhao says no, while King Zhao's dad is really convinced and repents for his sins. He teaches the slave girl Wang Mu everything he knows, and they work on implementing a new virus that will make everybody on Path as smart as the Godspoken without giving them the disease that will cause them to have OCD symptoms. King Zhao involuntarily consumes the virus and is healed, but she's completely God-pilled, and so she spends the rest of her 80 years alive tracing out lines in the wood, hoping to summon the voices of the gods back to her. After a lot of important science and chatting with the Hive Queens, they learn about Hours, which are basically souls, and they learn that Hours reside in the outside, a dimension beyond the physical. They realize that you can go into the outside by thinking really hard, and if you're able to hold the entirety of the atoms and everything that makes up a person, then you could do it, but nobody can really do it because nobody's that big. But Jane, because she's the internet and a tech beast, is the only one with enough bandwidth to realistically be able to hold the image of an entire person and take it into the outside and back inside. And if you can do that, you can choose where inside you pull it back to. Ender, Miro, and Cora get into a box and go outside to see if they are able to do faster than light travel by visualizing pulling the stuff back into a different place, like another planet. And so they go into the outside and they're there for a fraction of a second. They're barely there for any time at all. And Cora visualizes her desired Recalada virus and it's able to be created. Miro, who's been entirely crippled this entire time and incredibly depressed, visualizes the functioning body that he's always yearned for, and it's created there in front of him, and his hour, his soul, jumps to it, and his old crippled body withers away into dust. Ender, for a fraction of a second, visualizes his sister and his brother, and duplicates of Peter and Valentine as he knew them as children pop out and start making fun of him. Ender considers killing them, but he decides against it. Barely. They are, after all, his children. Children of the Mind! This is the finale of the main Ender's Game sequence. Now, I know that you may think that the teleportation stuff in the last one was sus, but it's not called teleportation. It's not. It's called faster than light travel. It's science, okay? You maybe would understand if you're able to go outside, but you're not. They learn that Ender's children are actually part of his hour, and they don't have their own. But young Valentine, is genetically identical to old Valentine. So they figure that even though the real Peter Wiggin is long dead, he's probably genetically identical to his long-dead hegemon twin. Both Valentine and Ender find young Val's existence very cringe. Miro finds her very attractive, but he also has the hots for Jane, who's available as Ender is now married to Navinia. Jane wonders what it's like to be human, as the interplanetary governments finally team up and decide to shut off the whole Wi-Fi in order to kill Jane. The Pecorino trees are able to communicate with each other telepathically, as are the Hive Queens. On the day of the Wi-Fi shutdown, the Hive Queens and the Piggy Trees both donate some of their mental space to let Jane whiz around inside there as she temporarily survives via time sharing. Ender's team splits up to try and solve the two major problems. The scientist team, led by young Val, knowing that the virus was not native to Lusitania, figure that whoever sent out the virus, who they call the Descaladoras, are very likely to be very dangerous. Meanwhile, new Peter would like to be also as relevant as the hegemon version of himself was, so he makes it his mission to use diplomatics to stop the fleet that's going to bomb Lusitania, the piggies' homeworld. Peter starts by having Jane teleport him to Path, where he chats to Wang Mu, the slave girl, who King Jiao's father basically adopted while King Jia went crazy. Meanwhile, young Val works full-time on the Descalada problem. Everyone finds her pretty cringe to be around, so she spends a lot of time with Miro in the starship, scouting new places where they can create even more colonies. Meanwhile, the Hive Queen and Piggy the Human chat about what it must mean to be human. Nobody really likes to spend time with young Val, especially Valentine, because they find her artificial sweetness borderline insulting, and regular line a little weird that Ender was thinking about her that much. Young Val starts to hate herself and her life. Jane realizes that living inside the Ansibles is not really sustainable, but because of her link with Ender, she would be able, technically, to reside inside of young Val's body because that is using up Ender's hour. So somehow, Ender and everyone in this world considers it socially acceptable for Ender to be the one to decide that it's okay for Jane to take over young Val's body, and Miro spends 300 pages hardcore peer pressuring Val while alone in space that if she merged with Jane, she'd definitely still be the same person. Like 100%, trust me bro, you'd be the same person, you'd still be young Val. And young Val is like, how could you possibly know that? This has never been done before. And Mira's like, no bro, trust me, while really just being horny for Jane and young Val simultaneously, and it would make his decision really easy if they were just the same person. And after 300 pages of poor young Val's will being whittled down, she agrees. Jane gets her wish of being human and is also safe from the dependency of the Ansibles, and, unsurprisingly, all but completely overwrites young Val's personality, taking the poor young girl's body for her own. Meanwhile, Ender, who's like 60 and still one of the smartest people in the universe, is pretty happy with continuing to contribute to solving the world's most important problems, but his wife Navinia wants him to be at home. So he works in the farm, and his hour is so bored of this that he dies. The rest of his hour just goes to Peter's body, who's doing more interesting stuff. But it doesn't really make much of a difference to Peter's personality. He's basically the same. Peter and Wang Mu spend a while convincing people not to blow up Lusitania, and they eventually agree. But the Admiral, who's actually in charge of the ship, decides to completely ignore the New Order and blow up Lusitania anyway, and he deploys the Little Doctor. Jane teleports Peter and Wang Mu into the ship, and they give him a badass speech about blowing up people being very, very bad. And Jane teleports the bomb back inside of the ship. It's inert. She teleports the inert bomb back inside the ship. Meanwhile, the scientists discover the planet that they think is most likely to have the Descaladoras. Jane, Peter, and Wang Mu get inside of a ship and start to interpret the readings that they're getting from the planet, but they're incredibly difficult to decipher. It seems that this species communicates entirely using genetic code. Peter gives a speech saying that no matter who they are on that planet, they will never be another Xenocide, and they will treat the matter with diplomacy, love, and respect. End Ender's Game. 3,000 years before, we jump back to following Bean, one of the soldiers who was at battle school at the same time as Ender, who fought in his platoon and was chosen to be one of the 5 in Ender's elite Geesh, who personally fought with Ender while they genocided the buggers. We follow Bean as he grows up alone as a 3-year-old on the streets of Rotterdam, an incredibly poor area with gangs, bullies, and dozens of starving kids. Bean is very, very smart. He enters into Poke's gang, almost befriending this 9-year-old girl. Bean comes up with the idea that they should enlist a bully into their family to protect them and keep them safe, but tricks Poke into thinking it was her idea. Bean picks out Ashiel, a fairly weak bully with a broken leg. They beat him up to embarrass him into joining their family. But when Ashiel is on the ground, Bean looks at him, and Bean realizes that they have to kill him now, and tells Poke to, but Poke doesn't, and Ashiel does join their family. Their plan works incredibly well. Ashiel is actually a decent bully and he keeps them safe, and they're able to go to the local nun, Sister Carlotta's food bank, and they get precedence in the line every day because they're a unit. And it's all very nice and it's all very sweet, but Ashiel is a tiny bit cold to Bean and Poke. One day, Poke goes missing and Bean tracks her down. He witnesses on the beach Ashiel first kiss and then murder Poke. Bean is frightened and runs away. He's soon adopted by Sister Carlotta, who's noticed how incredibly smart he is and has recommended him to attend battle school. Bean is cool with this as long as he gets consistent meals. On the battle school entrance test, Bean attains the highest score. He's as far apart from Ender as Ender was from everyone else. Once at battle school, Bean uses the fire safety maps to identify the secret tunnels in the building and crawls around them. The only person Bean really befriends is Nikolai, who isn't quite as smart as Bean, but incredibly sweet and good. Right before Bean is moved to command school to join Ender, Ashiel is let into battle school. Initially recommended by Sister Carlotta, but then very much not recommended by her, but they took him anyway. Bean and Ashiel have kind of an intense chat, but they're mostly civil to each other. Bean suspects that Ashiel is trying to kill him, so he's friendly to Ashiel and asks Ashiel to join him inside of the vents to show him a way to access the teacher's headquarters and stuff. Ashiel consents, believing that this is his opportunity to finally murder Bean. Bean, however, with the help of a few other battle schoolers, traps Ashiel inside of the vents using special cables in a way that Ashiel would starve to death and nobody would be able to hear him scream, and compels Ashiel to confess to his murders on record or to be left to starve. And so Ashiel does confess to murdering Poke, but he also confesses to murdering the doctor who helped him fix his leg. And Bean realizes that Ashiel compulsively has to murder anyone who sees him as weak. Bean reports Ashiel to the teachers using the recording that they got, and Ashiel is kicked out of battle school and sent to a mental hospital/jail back on Earth. Bean is promoted to Ender's Geesh and realizes quicker than Ender that they are controlling real ships. He's also extra conscious of Petra, who's one of the battle schoolers, stress and her failings, and they go from being total enemies to a tiny little bit friends. Bean says the enemy's gate is down, promoting Ender to blow up the bugger homeworld. As Bean knowingly sends his soldiers to their death, he sends a little prayer into their microphone, wishing them goodbye. The ending is of course the same as Ender's game, they detonate the buggers. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Sister Carlotta has continued to investigate into Bean's backstory, finding out that he was actually a genetic experiment created by this scientist called Valescu. She transmits this material to Colonel Graf, and they debate whether Bean is still considered a human because he's so intelligent. Spoiler, he is, obviously, and they just chain one little gene. They also managed to locate Bean's true parents, who are two very normal people who just happened to also birth Nikolai, Bean's only friend. They learn that Bean's real name would have been Julian Delphiki, so at the end of battle school, when everybody goes home to their parents, Bean is told about his parents, and he gets to go home and go and meet them. Shadow of the Hegemon. Petra, upon returning to her family on Earth, slowly realizes that she's a stranger in her home. Eventually, she's kidnapped. Bean has gone on holiday with his parents and Nikolai, and this is the last time that we see them in the series before they're completely forgotten as characters who even remotely care about Bean. Ashiel, who has escaped the insane asylum, Bean was right, has somehow manipulated the entire Indian world government into electing him as their secret chief. The world, which is becoming increasingly horny for battle schoolers, is very quick to give in to him, as we will see becoming a theme here. Ashiel uses this power to kidnap all the battle schoolers and uses them to create military plans for the Russians. Bean splits up with his family to be more discreet and goes on the run with Sister Carlotta. They visit Peter Wiggin and then leave Peter Wiggin. Petra, in some of her final moments of legitimate badassery in this series, holds out the longest among the kidnapped battle school graduates, but eventually gives in and agrees to be part of the plan making too. Still rebellious, Petra uses the raw power of her mind to create an uncrackable code hidden in the light and dark patterns of a surreal image that she attaches as a little dragon in a poem to an outgoing email, hoping for it to become a chainmail meme email signature that somebody who cares about her will see. Many chapters later, Bean eventually finds and cracks this incredibly difficult to guess code. Sister Carlotta hints that there might be something that's important for Bean to know, but she shouldn't tell him yet. Partially upset with her and partially hoping to avoid detection, Bean decides to split up with Sister Carlotta and request refuge of Thailand so that they can mount an attack against Russia. and go there and train an army of super soldiers with ex-battle schooler Suryarong. Don't worry about Suryarong school. He was apparently in battle school. I didn't remember him. He's just used to being in battle school and he's from Thailand. That's all they need to know about him. Bean activates his super telepathy again while he's hanging out with Suryarong and realizes that he's about to be bombed, and he narrowly escapes. Sister Carlotta realizes that Bean is in grave danger, and she gets on the plane in a rush without the fake names that they always use. A shield bombs Sister Carlotta. This bit actually really moved me despite how sudden it was. I don't think I liked it at the time, but I think she's probably my favorite Shadow character in the entire Shadow series. Something about her sincerity, it's just really sweet, really moved me. Bean receives her dead man's letter telling him that the doctors discovered his genetic manipulation, dubbed Anton's Key, and they learn that it will cause him to have super intelligence, but also to grow at an incredibly slow rate, but to never stop growing, which is why Bean was so small. I forgot to say this. Bean is very small. This is an important part of him. That's why he's called Bean. He was very, very small. He's very small here at this point as well. But his super intelligence will cause him to keep growing and never stop growing. So he'll eventually become a giant and die of heart failure by the time he's 15. This is basically the last time that we see Bean be kind of jovial. After this, he becomes pretty permanently depressed and joyless after this book. It's kind of sad in retrospect as well. Bean uses his soldiers and manages to corner Ashiel. Ashiel forces Bean's hand into striking a deal with him, where he's allowed to live and escape with the Chinese for the payment of Petra's life. Ashiel consents and Petra is freed. They all leave, and Petra says this series' most frequently used word: babies. Meanwhile, Peter, Ender's brother, is elected as the Hegemon, as we know, through really sketchy underground channels. He moves into the Hegemon office, staffed by apparently no one, and tries to add legitimacy to the role. Shadow puppets. Peter and his homies of Bean, Petra, Peter's parents, Suryarong, and a couple other dozen Thai soldiers are chilling in the Hegemon clubhouse, waiting for the plot to kick off. They spend a while chatting about how malicious and cunning Ashiel is. The Chinese, who Ashiel teamed up with, realize that Ashiel is a psychopath and try to arrest him, and Peter Wiggin decides to infiltrate the arrest and bring Ashiel into the Hegemon headquarters. This is easily the stupidest, most frustrating, most nonsensical, never-explained act in the entire series of 12 books. Peter completely ignores the warnings of everybody, everywhere, and decides to keep Ashiel around in order to study him, supposedly for his intelligence, despite the fact that Peter has ready access to Bean Julian Delphiki, genetically modified super genius Bean. And Peter somehow thinks it's wise to give Ashiel permission to call himself assistant to the Hegemon on the Hegemon computers and to send emails and use files and stuff. And Petra and Bean very smartly say, if you bring Ashiel here, then we're leaving. And so they do leave. But then upon Peter's parents informing him in the middle of the book that Ashiel might have an evil plan, Peter is like, oh shit. You're right. And he just packs up everything and he leaves. And all the soldiers and Suryarong turn against Peter and then work for Ashiel. It makes no sense. Meanwhile, as Petra and Bean travel around, Petra pitches Bean on having babies with her. Petra politely requests Bean to consider the idea of having babies with her. Petra expresses her desire to have a baby of Bean inside of her. Petra, who is indeterminately older than Bean, stresses the importance to her of having one of Bean's babies gestating within her womb. Petra, a child, hints at Bean that, as a teenage boy, he is unable to resist his sexual urges and should submit to her. Bean, who is dying of a genetic disease, communicates to Petra how he does not want to both curse other human lives with his disease, nor that he desires to leave Petra a widow. Petra suggests that they fertilize embryos and have Anton, this random scientist guy who discovered Bean's genetic defect, create a test that they can use to screen the embryos to see whether they have Anton's key turned or not, and not birthing the ones that do have it. Anton tells Bean how Anton is ace. He explains that he's ace. He basically says he's ace. He doesn't use that word, but he basically says it. But he says that any man's greatest meaning of life is to tie himself into the history of humanity by overcoming their asexual urges and finding a woman to have children with. Bean finally gives in, and him and Petra, whose ages are suspiciously not mentioned in this book, despite having been about 9 and 13 respectively in the last book, get married and have sex and fertilize 9 embryos, using the test that Anton says he's invented in order to only fertilize the embryos which don't have Anton's key turned. They're immediately betrayed, and the embryos are immediately stolen by Ashiel, who is still trying to murder Bean and Petra. He still wants his revenge from before. He's the whole antagonist of the book and he's coming for them. After some more book, Ashiel invites Bean and Petra to the Hegemon clubhouse in order to get their preshy-weshy embryos back, and Peter comes too. Bean, who isn't afraid to die, enters. Ashiel holds up a can of Bean's embryos, about to give them to him, and threatens to drop them if Bean moves forward. Bean moves forward. Ashiel kills the embryo and Bean continues to move forward. Bean says that he knows Ashiel is lying and that their embryos aren't there. Ashiel commands his Thai army and Surya Wong to kill Bean. Surya Wong says, JK, and reveals that he never actually betrayed Bean and Peter, and says he was just pretending to have betrayed them so that he can gain Ashiel's trust, so that he could really betray him at the moment that it would mean the most. Bean shoots Ashiel in the eye. Everyone is happy and nothing is wrong. Shadow of the Giant. In the cold open, we learn that, before he died, Ashiel impregnated a lady called Randy, whose mission he left her with is to raise Ashiel's child with full knowledge of his heritage and to continue his father's work. Meanwhile, Alai, one of the other battle school kids, takes over the entire Muslim world and starts to threaten war. Velomi, one of the Indian battle school kids, takes over the entire Indian world and starts to threaten war. Vlad, one of the Russian battle school kids, takes over the entire Russian world and starts to threaten war. Hot Soup, one of the Chinese battle school kids, takes over the entire Chinese world and starts to threaten war. Peter, one of the American not chosen for battle school kids and currently the hegemon of Earth, starts pitching his epic Discord server idea, the free people of the Earth, to a bunch of poor African nations that have no better choice but to join it. And he takes over the entire world, except the countries controlled by battle schoolers. Bean and Petra no longer give a shit about the main plot because Ashiel is forever dead and he's no longer a threat to them. But they do still spend a while chatting about how nonchalantly criminally badass AJ super genius psycho criminal he is. Bean and Petra realize that Anton was lying about checking whether their children and Anton's key turned, and that half of them did have the key and half of them didn't. Colonel Graf and Mazer Rackham, the people who were very important in Ender's Game, you know, the in-charge guy and then the trainer guy, who have apparently just been chilling, watching Netflix, catching up on the stuff that they weren't able to do because they just weren't in these other books. I don't know what they were doing. They finally rejoin the main plot, and they begin to offer the battle schoolers the opportunity to stop fucking with the world and instead get on ships like Ender and the governors of the new colony worlds. Everyone says no. Graf tells Bean that they can put Bean on a ship so that time will pass slower for him because he'll be traveling at light speed while passing at normal speed on Earth, meaning that more time will last for Bean to hope that a cure can be invented for him and his children in the meantime. And that also Graf will help look for Bean's kids. I forgot to say, Bean obviously never got his actual embryos back and they've been scattered all over the Earth and they're training these super smart AI systems to try and help them find it. And Graf tells Bean that he will also help look for Bean's kids, all for the cheap price of Bean using his crazy military brain to also help Peter unite the world under the hegemony. Bean reluctantly agrees. Bean also tells Graf that Peter was embezzling Ender's pension and that he should use AI to invest it instead. Alai loses and agrees to go to space. Vlad dies and agrees to go to space. Hot Soup is betrayed by China and agrees to go to space. Velomi goes insane thinking that she was actually a god of India instead of that just being a meme that she used to get India to rally when they needed to. And after briefly pitching both Peter and Alai to fuck her and let her carry her babies, she radically loses and causes the unnecessary deaths of Indian soldiers and agrees to go to space. Bean and Peter unite the world under the hegemony. It's incredibly boring during the main chunk of it, but it's satisfying right at the end when only a couple countries are still holding out. Graf reveals that he'd found all of Bean's embryos except one, but they give up on because it's impossible to find, I guess. Bean says good enough and files for divorce with Petra and tells her that he won't allow her to waste her life and the life of their 3 healthy kids on a disease that only affects him and their 3 cursed childs. This is because Bean said that he of course wouldn't go into space and take their children without letting Petra know. Petra says, "What the fuck, you fucking asshole. How could you lie to me? Bean says, I just wanted to be happy with our last months together. And I didn't want it to be clouded by grief. And the only way that you could have given that to me was by not knowing it. So please, can I have that gift? And Petra says, what the fuck? You stole that gift and took it forcibly. Bean says, can I have it with permission? Retrospectively? Bean supposedly remembers that his parents and his brother Nikolai are characters in the story, and supposedly says bye to them. We don't get to see them again. And he goes into space with his 3 kids, insisting that Petra remarry. Petra leaves her kid with Mrs. Wiggin or Mrs. Delphiki, I don't remember which one, but she's really nice whoever she leaves them with. And she remarries, her job of wrapping up random small tasks to do with the hegemony's New World country. And she doesn't visit her kids for a whole year. She's basically scared to see them. Upon returning, she's astounded that they recognize her at all, and she instantly falls in love with them. She cries about how she abandoned them, and Peter comforts her. Peter and Petra have sex and have more kids. Randy, the woman from the beginning, who's holding Ishil's kid inside of her, decides that the best life for her child is on a colony ship. She gets in one and fucks off at light speed. Hopefully it's clear who that embryo really is now. Ender in exile. Skipping forward in time right again to now right to the beginning of Ender's game, we see that in the immediate aftermath of the Xenocide, everyone thinks that Ender is a disgusting killer, but then they're okay with it. And everyone's cool with making Ender the leader of a new colony world. Valentine realizes that she hates her life and agrees to go up in space to accompany Ender, abandoning Peter. There are also 2 other groups that will be on the colony. One are the existing space soldiers who are already fighting there at the time when Ender killed all the buggers, who have already started to make a life for themselves there, as well as a couple hundred people who signed up for the International Fleet's Craigslist ad of whoever wants to leave behind their lives on Earth forever and become colonists with basically no background check. Among these no background check people is pretty sharp 13-year-old Alessandra, whose crazy, fakey, terrible with finances mother basically forced her to come. But Alessandra basically agreed to it after realizing that her mum, Dorabella, just wanted to flee from her mum, Alessandra's grandma, who hardcore guilt trips her for money and for being a bad daughter just all the time. On learning that Ender Wiggin will be on the same ship as them, Dorabella pitches Alessandra not just getting inside the colony ship, but getting inside Ender Wiggin, the colony ship. The International Fleet very stupidly elects Admiral Morgan to be the head of the ship. Don't worry, we don't already know him. This is a new guy who just very clearly, obviously intends to rule the colony itself when he gets there, but for some reason they let him on the ship. He has control of the ship, so Ender gets to chill before they get there. But he's supposed to hand over authority the second they get to the colony itself. While on the ship, Ender pretends to be a dumb little baby so that Admiral Morgan is not threatened and does not take preventative action. Admiral Morgan is not threatened and does not take preventative action. Ender secretly memorizes the names and faces of all the soldiers who are still alive and on the colony world and chats with Graf. Meanwhile, on the ship, Dorabella tries very, very hard to get Ender and Alessandra to become lab partners. Ender struggles with being horny for Alessandra. Ender realizes that he could never have a normal relationship with her, as it would make Morgan his father-in-law, since Dorabella is hardcore flirting with Morgan, which could give Morgan actual influence on the colony world and just make everything really annoying and weird, so he decides it's for the best that they do not get together. And besides, he has to keep himself free for the next 40 years in time for Navinia. Alessandra kisses Ender, and Ender is forced to make her see that she's not acting of her own will, merely her mother's. He does that to deflate the situation and deflate something else, and to make it clear to her that he does not like her that way. They're cool, and they remain good friends without any additional perks. When they arrive at the colony world, Ender completely blows past Morgan and hands him a letter telling him that his duties have ended, and that Graf set up a scary computer program on the ship that will snitch to the soldiers on board to arrest Morgan if he tries any funny business. Meanwhile, Ender greets all the veterans by name and faces and makes Morgan look really silly and small. So Morgan just concedes defeat and makes to leave. This might seem really anticlimactic, but it was actually really awesome. It's actually a great part of the book. It was so good. Dorabella decides to leave with Admiral Morgan and expects Alessandra to come with her as well. Alessandra wants to stay with Ender and wants Ender to love her as well. Ender wants to make it very clear to Alessandra that she's not to stay for him, but for herself. And if she wants to, he can make it so that Dorabella can't ever touch her again. Dorabella goes crazy and calls her daughter an ungrateful bitch and leaves Alessandra on the planet to go and have a life with Morgan, fleeing between the stars. Alessandra immediately gets married to the local scientist and invites him to analyze her insights and has babies. Ender has his convo with the Hive Queen, as well as his convo with Peter as he writes his memoir, which is the Hegemon book. We've seen this before. Meanwhile, on a certain colony ship belonging to a certain girl called Valomi, if you remember her, she was the one who took control of India and then went crazy, and another certain woman called Randy has come on the ship, and she is very odd, and she has a baby. Ender decides to get on the ship and investigate, and Valentine comes with. On said ship, he finally texts his mom and says, "Hey, what's up? Long time no chat." And it's really sweet. They have a nice conversation. He also texts Graf, and it's really sweet. Graf, who very undeservedly dies alone at home with no friends or family after being the backseat driver to saving the world twice. Ender is incredibly cold to Valentine, and for some reason decides to keep the secret of the Hive Queen being alive from her, which she presumably feels horrible about, and he does it for no good reason. On Valomi's world, now 16 years later for them, Randy's kid is causing havoc and writing shit about Ender's child-murdering xenocide ass on the internet. For what it's worth, I actually really like this retcon of Randy's kid. I'm about to tell you the kid is, if you haven't figured it out. It's just really cool. But I actually really like this retcon of Randy's kid being the one who made Ender's reputation terrible for being a xenocide. Making the incredibly fickle people of the Earth hate Ender and want him dead again. Valomi banishes him to Earth, which is obviously exactly where he wants to go, where he'll disrupt all the peace that Peter and Bean spent their entire lives building. Peter is dead now, for clarity, and Bean is in space. He's flying around trying to wait out the time until they invent a cure for his disease. Ender arrives, and Shield 2 literally fears for his life, given Ender's reputation, thinking that Ender is likely to murder his ass. Shield 2 hatches the ingenious plan of letting Ender kill him, get it secretly recorded, and have his aides posthumously spread the video on Earth to permanently end Ender's reputation. Ender and Shield 2 meet in a dark alleyway. Shield 2 tries to provoke Ender, but Ender is moved by finally getting to look at the long-lost son of none other than his two best friends, Petra and Bean. Shield 2 was that embryo that they couldn't find. It was Shield 2, it was this guy, it was him. This guy is Bean's kid, this guy is Bean's last kid. And he has the key turn. Ender tells this to Shield 2, and Shield 2 freaks out and beats Ender to a pulp in probably the biggest scene of nail-biting direct violence in the entire Shadow books. Ender refuses to fight and commands a horrified Valentine to simply watch and to not engage, and so she simply watches. Shield 2, mid-punch, realizes in his own time that Ender is correct, and that Shield isn't actually his dad, and that he must be the kid of super geniuses, and that killing is wrong, and that he can make a difference starting with tonight, such as by rushing Ender to a hospital. Ender lives, Shield 2 changes his name to Absent from the series from now on, and Ender zips off in the ship again into the future. Shadows in Flight. 5 years into the future, a 20-year-old Bean, exclusively referred to by his children as the Giant, because he's really big now, is trapped in the hull of his ship as his eldest child, Sergeant, 6 years of age, bullies and antagonizes his other two siblings, called Ender and Carlotta. It might get a little tricky to keep up, but just remember, all the original versions of these characters, the real sister Carlotta is dead. She was blown up by a shield. Ender is obviously zipping around into the future. He's not a part of Shadows in Flight. Sergeant pitches that they murder Bean for nutrients. Ender punches Sergeant in the nose for just suggesting that and nearly chokes Sergeant to death. Ender snitches the entire thing to Bean, and Bean expresses his disappointment. Sergeant continues to study ancient wars and strategy. Carlotta continues to work on the ship and mechanics, and Ender continues to communicate with Earth companies who are supposedly studying Anton's key, trying everything he can to develop a cure. They stumble upon a massive alien colony ship orbiting a super habitable planet. They could be in danger, they could be about to get killed, but even if they were to turn right around, the ship would still be able to see their lightspeed path back to Earth, and it would put life on Earth in danger. So just ignoring the ship is not an option. They decide to go in and investigate. Bean elects Sergeant as the leader, who was actually just bored and understimulated, and becomes a lot cooler. Before going in, they deduce off of literally zero information that the ship must be an old bugger ship instead of a human one, or literally anything else. Bean reveals in his internal monologue that he secretly actually course-corrected the ship to go towards the habitable planet, because he wanted his children to use the secret artificial wombs on the ship to slowly start a new planet there, because he really does consider their species to be entirely different from humans. Sergeant goes in and they find the pilot, who are Formic male drones. They learn that the Formic males, Formic is a synonym for bugger. It's just the formal term for it. Eventually the author realized that it was like too funny to keep buggers as a name or something, I don't know. They learn that the Formic male's mental connection to the Hive Queen is tenuous at best. The Formic males magically reveal a cure to Anton's key, which Ender instantly implements, and then they're all fine. The level of Deus Ex Machina is wild with that. Like, unreal. They've been trying to solve the Anton's key problem for like 6 books or something, and it comes out of nowhere with like practically zero explanation. The buggers have a giant biosphere inside of their ship. Bean insists on getting to talk to the Formics one time before he dies. They all laboriously help Bean to transfer between the ships, as the scale of it is likely to shock his heart and trigger death. Bean is about 4.5 meters tall now. He hasn't moved from the hull cargo deck of their ship in years. Bean makes the journey and chats to the drones, who reveal in a frustrating retcon that the worker drones are actually conscious and the Hive Queen is secretly evil and overriding their will. The Formics also snitch that there's one Hive Queen left alive, and they thought that it was with Bean's kids this whole time. Bean has long since deduced that Andrew Ender Wiggin is indeed the speaker for the dead, and is likely to be running around at light speed, but realizes that it must be because he's been trying to find a home for the Hive Queen. Bean debates sending Ender a text telling him this, but decides not to, as beyond just disrupting a canon event, he'd have to go all the way to his laptop, which was all the way in the other room, and he was planning on dying soon. But most of all, he figures that Ender would want to hear from Bean or be reminded of his old life, which is a very good information to keep vital information like, hey, that little alien you're secretly carrying around might secretly be a massive liar. But overall, Bean is a good guy. Bean tells his kids about the plan of them living and starting lives on the planet, and after a lot of arguing, they basically agree. Inside the biosphere, Bean insists that he wishes to walk in the breeze and sun and feel nature on his face one last time. He laboriously gets up and heaves his massive 4.5 meter body off the ground, and he states his intention to walk with his own 2 feet. And then he did. And then he died. The Last Shadow. Now, instead of remotely following up the plan that they agreed on with their father, Bean's kids go so rogue. They decide instead that what they should do is to take pit stops on human colony worlds. No, they're not dying of youth anymore. Now they're just like really smart people, but they've just got so cocky that somehow they're a different species just because they're smarter. But they're not that smart. The main thing that they do is just talk about how smart they are. So much of these books is them talking about how smart they are. Like, they'll be like, I think the fact that that guy frowned means that he must be sad because his like father left him or whatever. And like, oh, blah, 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 blah. They'll just like hardcore like psychoanalyze with no evidence everybody who they meet and then be like, yes, us Legubadites are the smartest people on the earth. But either way, because of this, they apparently think that makes them not human. And so instead of just being normal people and living a normal life somewhere in any of the 100 worlds that they could choose from, they instead decide to use their lightspeed ship to take pit stops on human colony worlds, seduce and reproduce with a highly intelligent local, kidnap the baby, and take the baby with them on a ship leaving at light speed and leave the spouse forever. Bean's children each turned out to be terrible, cold, or abusive parents in their own unique ways. And Bean's 7 grandchildren all have insane names. Colonel Graf, I really hate this bit. Colonel Graf magically appears on their ship through their computer as a hologram that he supposedly made thousands of years ago, that we're just hearing about now, tells them that a Descalada molecule has fallen into the river in Lusitania City. Hey, they need their genius brains to help them deduce what planet it came from. They don't believe him, so Jane and Miro teleport onto their ship, Jane who's now using Valentine's body, and then teleport them back down onto the surface of Lusitania using their epic faster than light travel technique, now formally called detouring. Jane incredibly ethically dubiously detours forcibly all of Bean's children to their spouses' home planets and tells them not to return, they can't return because they can't teleport, until they have convinced their old SOs to join them and become a part of their children's lives again. Meanwhile, Bean's grandchildren, but most notably just this one girl called Thallium, and later this one kid called Sprout, are put into a really wacky hotel and asked to commence sciencing. Thulium escapes and effortlessly jumps over the fence to visit the Pequeninos. The same fence that brutally crippled Miro for an entire book. Do you remember how big of a plot point that was? And they acknowledge it. This is acknowledged in universe as being weird, but there's no proper explanation. It's just like, oh yeah, Astrologumenites are so smart, we can jump over electric fences and not even get scratched. She meets some piggies, she says hi. Peter decides that setting his mind on becoming a hegemon will help no one, as the world doesn't need it, and decides to solely focus his attention on the mystery of the Descolada. If this sounds familiar, it's because it is. Peter and Wangmu spend thousands of hours arguing over whether Peter is secretly Ender, since Ender's hour when he died went into Peter. The answer? It doesn't matter. It makes no difference. He's just Peter. They spend so much time arguing about this thing that makes no difference. But whatever. What are you gonna do? Peter suggests going on an expedition to Descoladora in order to potentially suicidally go down and collect samples of their planet. Peter argues with Thulium. Peter is taught the secret of detouring by Jane, the secret that previously took every inch of Jane, who is the entire internet and computer connection of the whole world. It took that level of brain power to use, but Peter's able to learn it, so yeah, cool. He's told that he must both love Wangmu and Thulium a lot more in order to be able to do it with them. Thulium says, I wanna come. Jane stupidly teaches Thulium how to detour on her own. Real Valentine and Navinia both say that they have far too much homework to join the plot or to get a single appearance anywhere in this novel. The idea that Valentine is only relevant when Ender is around makes me sad, because I really like Valentine in the main series. She was great. Thulium and the others of Bean's grandchildren talk more about how incredibly genius they are. Peter and Wangmu detour to the Descoladora planet and meet some talking birds who almost shit on them and take all their stuff. Wangmu nicely says, "How are you?" to one of the birds, and upon being spoken to respectfully, the bird takes Wangmu to one of their leaders and they chat. The birds ominously imply that there are humans somewhere on the planet. Thulium waits for the second that Peter and Wangmu detour back and then goes down herself with her cousin Sprout. Their stuff is stolen and they're shit on, and Thulium saltily teleports away. Sprout, who's apparently a very quick learner, manages to ground himself. He understands teleportation enough to just keep himself there when somebody's trying to teleport him. He's introduced to the leader of the humans, who is deformed and chimp-like. His name is Rakyak, and he tells Sprout all about how they came from Earth thousands of years ago in a slow-moving colony ship, and they purposefully genetically modified themselves to be able to have a better grasp of the ship by being able to swing places and manipulate tools with their feet, which is why they look all deformed and chimp-like. They say that the talking ravens and Kia birds were the natural result of a few generations of selective breeding, which would make them smart enough to talk. They say that deep beneath the ground lives an entirely separate colony of humans who are salty for not getting to visit the surface world. So Sprout detours back to the quarantine bay, taking one of the birds with him. And the birds chat to some of the buggers and stuff. They chat about humans and stuff, now we have even more alien races. But they are just normal birds, unfortunately. But they're kind of alien, but their psychology is basically entirely human. Remember when I was happy about the Hive Queen's thing about seeing the past and future as the same, and therefore her commitments, blah blah blah, something like that. It was nice back in this universe when the aliens actually had alien psychology, and their telepathy and stuff was weird and unexpected, and their actual culture and everything was really strange. I mean, same with the piggies and the way that they killed people and Liba and everything. But c'est la vie, human birds is an okay answer to why the I'm not happy with the ending of The Lost Shadow. I wish that we'd gotten a different ending for the Descoladoras. I just waited so long, okay? Children of the Mind came out in 1999. And the guy, wasn't Scott Caan, he announced The Lost Shadow in 2013. And I waited, and it came out in 2021. And then we got Talking Birds. And we could have gotten DNA. We could have gotten wild creatures who invented technological stuff. But we got these weird chimps on a spaceship. And we got talking parrots. C'est la vie. Anyway, Thulium detours to chat with her mum, who's really nice. She immediately detours back and then says that she'll visit her again soon, no sooner than a year. Her dad, Sergeant, returns and says he will control her, and she says he willant, and she detours him around to show her power and then detours away, back onto the planet Nest. The humans living underground on Nest, called the Folk, mysteriously invite Peter and Wangmu and Jane and everyone to have a nice dinner underground. They all go with no protection. They find Thulium and see that she's been brutally poisoned and she has this disgusting, awful skin disease and is too weak to teleport away. And so Jane instantly teleports all of them away and they all start dying, and Thulium is really dying because she thought it was a good idea to detour right into the place of these people who are known to be amazing and screwing around with DNA and are still likely to be the best candidate that they have for sending the life-threatening virus of the Descalada to Lusitania in the first place. And so nothing they do works to cure Thulium because their genetic modification stuff is pretty damn good and Thulium is destined to die. But then the Hive Queen does some genetic modification and cures Thulium. And then she cures everyone. They decide not to get revenge on the Folk because they don't want to start another war. So they teleport to the surface of the planet and find that thousands of birds have been starting to be murdered by the underground humans who are salty for being made to live underground for reasons that were kind of confusing. Jane tells all the birds that anyone who wants to live on another world should come, and she detours thousands of ravens and Kias and humans to various uninhabited continents or colony worlds and other completely barren worlds. Jane tells everybody not to teach anyone else detouring, even though she was super chill with doing so this book. Do you remember at the end of Children of the Mind, the reason why they considered that the Descaladora planet was the most likely place to have the Descalada virus was because basically the only thing that they received in transmission from the planet was a copy of the exact same Descalada virus. So they reasoned it probably came from here, right? Fair enough. And so the scientists finally decide to compare the version of the Descalada that the inhabitants of the planet send them and the version of the Descalada found in Lusitania. And they realized that the two versions of the virus are very slightly different, and that the original version they received in the transmission is different in just 2 places. And those 2 places that are different are the thing that are responsible for changing the virus into a harmless recording virus, which just copies genetic material, making a record of sentient life. And they do realize this by talking briefly to the Folk and the people on the planet who call it the copier and not the Descalada. So in wondering exactly how likely it is that those exact 2 genes being changed would be the ones to make the recorded virus become the damning Descalada virus, they decide to put the Descalada inside of a vacuum to see how likely these distortions are to be made, because a vacuum is space. And what they observe is that inside of a vacuum, the Descalada virus is programmed to fold up for transportation among large distances. And they realize that the 2 places where the Descalada's genes are distorted are 2 of the extremely few places where, when the virus is folded, are still exposed to space. They conclude that the original senders of the Descalada are very likely completely innocuous beings wanting to simply categorize and make an encyclopedia of all sentient life. They consider the mystery to be solved and closed. Jane agrees to potentially fabricate academic credentials for the crew if they'd like to go into academia after this, so everybody just picks up their life and continues. We don't know exactly what happens to Miro after this, which is kind of sad. I wonder what happened to Miro. Peter and Wangmu have a baby. Sergeant takes his other kids and goes back into Bean's ship, leaving and continuing to raise them to be monsters. Peter, Wangmu, Thulium, and Sprout go to visit their monkey, human, bird friends on their different worlds. Gruff's hologram pitches Sergeant on not being so abusive in a way that's actually pretty sweet, I think, and Sergeant says okay, which is probably unbelievable, but it was actually really sweet. Thulium subtly calls out to Peter and Wangmu to almost adopt her, and they rather adorably comply, and they create the final found family of the series. That is a wrap on Ender's Game. What did we learn? 1. Don't xenocide. 2. Don't xenocide. 3. Don't get genetically modified. 4. If you are genetically modified, that doesn't make you not human. 5. Do not kidnap your children from your spouse who you had them with. 6. If someone is trying to kill you, don't make embryos and then trust them with someone else. 7. If someone who is trying to take over the world and is a psychopath child murderer, as in they are a child and they're a murderer, if you're the president of the world and you decide to bring that guy into the White House and make him the secretary, don't do that. 5. If someone's mom is trying to get them to date you, but they're trying to date your business rival, don't date them. This one I'm not indignant about. That's just kudos to Ender. He made a good decision there. 6. Don't go down to the Descalada planet. Keep it a mystery. It's more fun. If some people are sending out crazy bioweapons to you, maybe the explanation is lame and you don't want to know. Maybe you just let them send you the bioweapons, right? Not everything needs an answer these days. But yeah, it's a good series. Check it out. If you like Ender's Game, obviously consider reading Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. It's very similar to why I started this series in the first place. But now I'm free, and I'm going to try and read anything else, because I don't want to spend my life reading the same book series forever. I hope you enjoyed this. Check out the Free People for the Earth Discord. Vote for Peter Wiggett in the next election, and I'll see you all next time. Do not xenocide.